got interested.
christiangeekcentral.com. John Allen asks, Paeter, what exactly do you mean that you should not listen to your feelings? I feel like we always have to be logical and rational 100%. We as humans have feelings, so how should we respond to them? I think that the model seen in Scripture, what Scripture tells us about emotions, is that they are an important part of who we are, what we are as humans, you know? So I don't want to take like a Spock approach and be trying to like not be emotional, you know? In fact, I think a lot of people take that approach maybe because they've been hurt and they just don't want to feel, and it's just really painful to allow themselves to feel, and so they really try to maintain a kind of a Spock or a Data type approach. In fact, I suspect that's why those characters are really popular among geeks, because a lot of geeks have been hurt by people, hurt bad by people, you know. And so I think there's appeal in the idea, as Riker says, oh no, maybe it was Picard in Star Trek. It wasn't Generations, it was the Borg one, First Contact. When they're walking on the Borg-infested ship and Data flips off his... I'm gonna get some Star Trek cred. I usually don't talk very highly of Star Trek. I'm trying to build some Star Trek points here. Some Star Trek credibility. But you know, Data's like, he's got this emotion chip now in this movie, and he's like getting nervous, and he's like, "Sir, I'm feeling these things," and da-da-da-da, and somebody, I think it was Riker maybe, tells him to turn off his emotion chip, and he says, "Done," and then he's like, just totally straight Data again. And I think it was Picard that says, "Mr. Data, sometimes I envy you," you know. And so I think there's, you know, a lot of appeal for that kind of character. I think I've walked this whole area, haven't I, by now? Let me walk through the middle ones. But no, emotions are absolutely part of who we are, who we're made to be. Our emotions glorify God. Jesus was very emotional. He wept and he was angry. But emotions should be the kind of like the train, the caboose of the train. And I think our minds, how we reason, you know, and think logically, I think that needs to be the engine. Now, someone might say, well, sometimes you've got to follow your heart, otherwise you're not going to be compassionate. So you can feel compassion, but you can also be compassionate as a virtue. You can just choose, I'm going to be compassionate. And so you can be compassionate, as we should be compassionate, through logical and reasonable choice. Like, this is a virtue. This is a God-honoring thing. This is a way in which we can echo the character of God by choosing to be compassionate, by choosing to be loving. And that's another word that is often assumed to be emotion, but love, biblically speaking, is not an emotion. Emotion often accompanies it, but love is the prioritization of someone over yourself, you know. Biblical love, certainly. Our emotions, the role of our emotions, the way I see them, and basing it as much as I can off of Scripture, is that emotions are very important. If we're not emotional beings, there is probably something wrong. But our emotions should be a response to what is true. They should be a response to what is real, rather than our indicator of what is true and what is real. And emotions, you know, how should we respond to them? I think my son's about to come say goodnight to me. They can be a motivator and a reason to examine truth. You know, like if something angers us, then we should say, okay, why am I angry about this? And what would be the right action to take? And you know, so they can be kind of triggers and catalysts for thinking through what we ought to do. And that's something that we discern and figure out, I think, with our ability to reason more than, certainly more than what our feelings might tell us to do. Because if we follow our emotions, those can just come and go and change with the wind. I think a lot of relationships fall apart because people think of love as an emotion rather than as a virtue that they have committed to, you know. Yeah, all kinds of dysfunction, I think, results when we follow our emotions. Okay, yeah, I don't think it's here. I think I gotta go to that other thing. Oh, dang, look how far out of my way I gotta go to get there. Okay, that's a good question, John. He says, I may be taking this too seriously, but if a person is hungry, which is a feeling, hungry for a Big Mac, should that person think logically and not eat it because it is not healthy for that person? Well, I would almost categorize feelings, you know, in this instance, as being different from emotions. I mean, because you can have the biological feeling of hunger. You know, that's not an emotion. It can cause an emotion. Be like, I'm ticked off. I've been hungry for the last 3 hours, you know. So then you got that emotion caused by the physical feeling, you know. So, and you know, if your body's in pain, yeah, you ought to pay attention to that feeling and what it's telling you about your body. You know, that's if you want to preserve your body so that it can continue to serve Christ in this life, you know. But I think, you know, then, you know, you've got that feeling, the physical feeling of hunger, which, you know, you should possibly respond to. Sometimes, you know, as I'm learning, as I'm trying to change my eating habits, you know, we've got to just fight past our hunger and discipline our bodies and keep them under control, as Paul says, and just drink a glass of water instead and respond to that feeling of hunger by just drinking more water, and that'll fix that physical feeling, you know. So yeah, I think even in that context, you gotta think logically and think, okay, what's best for my body, you know. But then again, you know, Scripture also says, you know, it's in Ecclesiastes, you know, that that I've seen what's good and fitting is for a man to, you know, to eat and drink and enjoy the things that the wealth that he has in this life. So in other words, the things that we don't need but that are just enjoyable. And there's a psalm that actually even talks about how there are things that are pleasurable to eat. Again, I'm live streaming right now, so it's not a good time for me to, because I can't look this up. But there's a psalm that talks about the things that are good and pleasurable to eat that are a gift from God, and they're things that have been processed by man. You know, like I think maybe wine was maybe one of the things that was mentioned there, and things that aren't necessarily profitable for the body to be having all the time, but that are enjoyable. And these also are gifts from God. You know, so it's impossible to live this life perfectly, and we are commanded to be perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. But we shouldn't be stressed out about that. That's the fascinating dichotomy in what the Christian life is meant to be, is that here Jesus says, be perfect. He doesn't say do your best. He says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And he commands that knowing we can't do it, you know. But he's not willing to lower that standard, you know, because perfection is glorious, and one day we will be made perfect. And so there's no reason to let go of that beautiful, beautiful standard, because that is our future, that is our hope, that is our future glory, that is our eternity as believers that we get to look forward to. What an amazing thing. Thank you, Yahweh Jesus. But in the meantime, the reality is, you know, we're going to not always be able to, I shouldn't say not always, we are most of the time, maybe even, I don't know, very often, just not going to be able to discern or make the right choices or tell the difference between what is good and fitting and what is being legalistic and too hard on ourselves, or, you know, or unfruitful, you know. Just a lot to sort through, and that's why it's so amazing and wonderful to have the grace and forgiveness provided by the sacrifice of Jesus, because we get to have that vision of perfection, that vision of glory that we are promised to one day experience and have fully. That is not compromised. And yet the fact that we can in no way live up to that is absolutely and completely dealt with and compensated for by Jesus. A popular way of viewing morality in America is we lower the standard according to what is common. We say, you know, hey, You're only human. Or, hey, everybody does that. These are the things we say to each other, you know? I have to fight myself to not say those same kinds of things. You know, don't be so hard on yourself. Everybody does that. Well, maybe don't be so hard on yourself. You know, don't, like, talk yourself down and take on an attitude of, like, oh, I'm worthless, you know, or anything like that. Because that's not biblical. But at the same time, we shouldn't just be content to keep lowering that standard of what we're aspiring to based on kind of like what is kind of achievable or maybe achievable, you know, based on what we see happening around us. So, John, I don't think you're taking questions like that too seriously. I think there's a place and a time to be pondering all those kinds of things, you know? I mean, and man, the more I've contemplated and confronted the reality that what Jesus is asking for is perfection, the more I recognize I cannot match that, the more I realize really my true condition and how much I need to be rescued, and the more I love Jesus and am grateful to him for rescuing me. Pursuing perfection without grace, that's a horrible place to find yourself in. Applying grace without pursuing perfection and just taking grace and forgiveness for granted, that also will get you into just a mess in life again and again. But pursuing perfection with an absolute awareness and self-application of God's grace and forgiveness, that is life. That is life. My natural tendency, I need to just find this blizzard, dang it. My natural tendency is just to think like the world thinks and live like the world lives and forget about grace and forget about perfection. But that's such a sad road to go down, and I only find hurt and pain when I head down that road. But when I'm in those times of like applying both the standard of perfection and God's grace, there's just some beautiful self-discovery and discovery of who God is, even more important. Come on, Blizzard!